The thing about corporate espionage, Dante Hayes whispered to Sage Johnson as they crouched behind a crumbling brick wall on Morrison Street, is that it never really stays buried. It just finds new walls to hide behind. Dante's fingers were already moving, spray paint hissing in controlled bursts, transforming the wall into something dangerous and beautiful. A visual manifestation of quarterly earnings reports stacked like bones, with human figures climbing out of the red numbers like they were drowning. It was past midnight. The city breathed around them in that particular way it does when most people are sleeping, when the streets belong to artists and insomniacs and people with nowhere else to be. Sage stood watch, their lean frame silhouetted against the sodium vapor streetlight, eyes scanning for patrol cars that didn't come anymore. The cops had stopped bothering with this neighborhood about 6 months ago, right around the time Meridian Capital began its final acquisition push. When a corporation decides a place doesn't matter, the city follows suit. "You think anyone sees these?" Sage asked, not for the first time. They'd worked together for 3 years now, ever since Dante had walked out of Meridian's climate division with a USB drive full of falsified environmental impact reports. That was when Dante's hands learned to speak in a language the street understood. "They see them," Dante said, stepping back to admire the piece. "I mean, obviously they see them. The paint's still wet. But they see them, Sage. They feel them in their bones." Sage smiled despite themselves. This was the Dante that had emerged after the corporate world tried to swallow them whole and spit them back out changed. This version was dangerous in a way the old one, the one who'd worn Brooks Brothers suits and attended climate strategy meetings where nothing ever changed, could never be. They made their way deeper into the neighborhood, toward the edges where gentrification hadn't quite finished its work yet. There were still bodegas run by the same families for 40 years, still rent-controlled apartments with long-term residents who remembered when this place had a different name, still corners where you could find community instead of consumption. But the signs were everywhere. Space-available banners hanging from storefront windows, construction equipment rusting in vacant lots, those glossy marketing posters for urban living reimagined, with pictures of condos that cost more than anyone around here made in 5 years. Dante had been documenting it all through murals, turning corporate speak into visual language that made gentrification visible, tangible, undeniable. "What you're doing," Sage said as they walked, "it's bigger than you know. I hear people talking about the murals, in the laundromat, at the community center. They say you're the only one who gets it." "I get it because I lived it," Dante replied. "I translated it for a living, corporate to street, street to corporate. That's all I'm doing now, just in reverse." They arrived at an old brownstone on Delancey, one that Dante had been watching for months. According to the papers Dante had acquired from a contact still working at Meridian, this was a keystone property. Once Meridian controlled it, they controlled the entire block. Dante began setting up, but Sage interrupted. "Wait, there's something different about this wall." Indeed there was. Behind the layers of recent graffiti and city grime, Sage could make out something older, more deliberate. Dante ran their fingers across it, and suddenly they felt it too. A section of the wall that wasn't quite solid, that seemed to have depth beyond what should have been possible. "Help me," Dante breathed. Together, they pulled away loose bricks, revealing a seam, and then a gap, and then a darkness that swallowed the beam of Sage's phone light. "Holy shit," Sage whispered. "A tunnel. An actual tunnel." Dante's mind raced. They'd grown up 3 blocks from here, spent their whole childhood in this neighborhood before the corporate recruiters had come calling, before the money had corrupted their intentions. They'd never known about this. "It's old," Dante said, running their hand along the walls inside. "Really old." They ventured deeper, Sage close behind, and what they found stopped their hearts. The tunnel walls were covered in art. Decades of it. Layers upon layers of murals, tags, stencils, paintings, and manifestos. Art from the 1950s, sitting underneath art from the 1980s, sitting underneath art from just last year. It was a hidden archive of resistance, a gallery of voices that should have been erased but weren't, because they'd been literally underground, protected by darkness and history. "These are incredible," Sage breathed, phone light moving across the walls. "Look at this one. It's from the 60s. Anti-war. And this whole section. These are Black Panthers, I think. And look at this." "Stonewall," Dante finished, seeing a series of portraits and dates and names. "This is a sanctuary. This whole tunnel system is a sanctuary." They pushed deeper, and the tunnel began to open up, to reveal chambers and intersections. And then they saw the people. Not threatening, just present. Figures emerging from the shadows with cautious curiosity. Unhoused residents who'd transformed this abandoned subway system into community. People living in the spaces the city above had decided didn't matter. An older woman stepped forward, her face weathered by seasons spent outside. "You're not from Meridian," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Dante said carefully. "I'm not." "The murals," the woman continued. "The ones on the walls above, the ones about the developers. That was you." Dante nodded slowly. "How did you—" "We're not invisible," the woman said sharply. "We see what happens on those streets. We know what's coming." She introduced herself as Marie, and she introduced them to the others. There were maybe 40 people living in the tunnel system, she explained, organized and careful, maintaining an uneasy truce with the gang members who used the tunnels as neutral ground for their own survival. It was an ecosystem, a functioning community that existed in the spaces between the city's official narratives. Over the next 3 weeks, Dante became obsessed with the tunnels. They mapped them with Sage's help, photographed the historical murals, documented the community that lived there. And slowly, they began to understand what they were looking at, a completely functional alternative infrastructure that the city had forgotten existed, a network that connected the neighborhood horizontally, creating possibility where the city above created only barriers. They began adding their own murals to the tunnel walls, creating markers and pathways, connecting the historical resistance art to the contemporary moment. Each piece was a waypoint, a message, a documentation of what was happening above translated into the visual language of what was happening below. But 2 months into this work, everything changed. Sage burst into the safe house where Dante had been processing photographs, laptop open, hands shaking. "Meridian knows about the tunnels," Sage said. "I heard it from Marcus, who heard it from a construction supervisor. They're planning something massive. They're calling it infrastructure revitalization. But what they mean is extraction. They want to seal the tunnels, maybe collapse them entirely, and build luxury apartments directly over the top. They're calling it the Urban Renewal Initiative Phase 5. They get the neighborhood, they eliminate the evidence, and they get the PR win." Dante felt something crystallize inside them. For months they'd been creating art without considering the consequences. They'd been treating gentrification as an abstract problem to be solved with aesthetics. But the tunnel community wasn't abstract. Marie wasn't abstract. The 40 people living in preserved darkness weren't abstract. They were real, and they were about to be buried alive. "We could expose it," Sage said quietly. "We have documentation. We have your insider knowledge about how Meridian operates. We have photographs of the community down there, the artwork, the infrastructure. We could make it impossible for them to proceed." It would be the ultimate whistleblower moment. Dante's hands understood corporate language well enough to translate it into a scandal. They could orchestrate the exposure perfectly, leak it to journalists, time it with community organizing, maybe get the tunnels officially recognized as a historical site. It would be dangerous, probably illegal, definitely career-ending in any traditional sense. But it would work. Except Dante stood at the tunnel entrance 3 nights later, looking at the wall where they'd first started adding their own art. "I can't," they told Marie, who'd emerged from the darkness to find them there. "If I expose the tunnels, I expose the community. I put every person down here at risk. The city will swarm. The authorities will get involved. You'll be displaced anyway, just faster and with less dignity." "And if you don't?" Marie asked. "Then we have time to organize, time to create something else, somewhere else, time to disappear before they close us in." Dante realized then what their art had actually been doing. It hadn't been inspiring a grassroots movement to resist gentrification. That would have been too clean, too simple. Instead, it had been quietly documenting the coordinates of resistance, showing people who might not otherwise know that alternative ways of living existed in this city, that community could function underground, that the spaces between official narratives were where real life actually happened. For 3 weeks, they worked with the tunnel community to execute a different kind of exposure. Not a corporate scandal, but a slow, deliberate relocation. Using Dante's knowledge of the city's infrastructure and Sage's network of community contacts, they identified other tunnel systems, other hidden spaces, other neighborhoods where unhoused communities were already organizing. They created a network of safe passage, marked by Dante's murals that only the people who needed to read them could actually see. Visual language so encrypted in street culture that corporate eyes couldn't penetrate it. They evacuated the tunnel before Meridian could seal it. 40 people, and then 50, and then more, moving through the city's hidden circulatory system like blood cells refusing to be cut off. Some went to other neighborhoods. Some created new underground communities. Some connected with existing organizing efforts. They scattered and reconstituted themselves elsewhere, the way resistance always does when it understands that visibility can be a death sentence. When Meridian finally sent contractors to begin the sealing process, they found an empty tunnel system, just the walls covered in decades of resistance art. Some of it new, all of it beautiful and defiant, and impossible to erase without destroying the neighborhood's history entirely. The project stalled. The lawyers got involved. Historical preservationists showed up. Suddenly the tunnels were evidence of something, of community, of history, of cultural worth. Dante had transformed the threat into complexity, which was the only real defense against gentrification's simplified logic of profit. On the night everything went public, Dante and Sage sat on a rooftop overlooking the neighborhood, watching the city lights reflect off the buildings that wouldn't be torn down, not because they'd won exactly, but because they'd made winning more expensive and complicated than it was worth. "Do you think it matters?" Sage asked. "What we did? In the end, do you think it actually changes anything?" Dante thought about Marie and the others, alive and organized and moving through the city. They thought about the tunnel walls, still standing, still covered in art. They thought about their hands, which had learned to speak in a language that buildings couldn't quite contain. "I think," Dante said slowly, "that resistance doesn't work like we're taught. It's not about winning. It's about making survival possible for the people who need it. It's about creating networks that can't be captured or controlled. It's about translating between worlds so people can see each other." They picked up a can of spray paint from beside them, one they'd carried all the way up to the rooftop. Without quite deciding to, they began adding to the building's wall, creating one more marker in the city's hidden language. One more waypoint for the next person who needed to know that the underground still had room, that resistance had architecture, that the most dangerous art was always the kind that made survival possible. The paint hissed in the darkness. The city breathed below them, enormous and indifferent and somehow still alive with possibility.